Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm great, thanks.
Well, good. I should tell people who you are. This dialogue, first of all, is part of my ongoing attempt to educate myself on Afghanistan, and you've been in Afghanistan quite a bit over the last couple of years, I think. Now, you are a Canadian, and according to stereotypes prevailing in the United States, that would make you a socialist pacifist. But so I should hasten to add, first of all, that you are in the Canadian Armed Forces, and in fact, you've spent your time in Afghanistan in that capacity. Secondly, I think you are not in favor of withdrawal, as I understand it, from Afghanistan. And third, on your blog, Flit, I noticed that you have these tributes, as many bloggers do, these kinds of blurbs, and from people, things that the well-known people have said about you or your blog. And one thing that was apparently said by Mark Stein, whose right-wing credentials are unassailable. He's a noted right-wing hawk. And
also a Canadian, I might add.
Is he? Well, that would explain your kinship, I guess. What he said about you was you are, quote, what was it, endearingly macho?
Yes, I'm still trying to decide whether I live up to that, but I just can't take it down.
But now we know that he was speaking by Canadian standards when he called you macho.
That's true.
And that lowers the bar a little bit, with all due respect for your countrymen.
Yes, yeah. He's. We're still proud of him, I think.
Of Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll leave that one to you. So tell me, first of all, if I've gotten anything wrong so far, and if I haven't, why don't you tell me what you were doing in Afghanistan and when you were there?
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think. Basically, from last September to this April, I worked with the intelligence staff of the Afghan Army Brigade in Kandahar province. I was there as part of the Canadian military. Right now,
are you in the Army?
That's correct.
And what rank?
I'm a captain,
Uh-huh.
and I was working, like I said, with the Afghan intelligence staff. Now, I should say that I'm not really in a position to take a position, I don't think, on whether the whole world should get out of Afghanistan or even Canada should. But I do think we were doing some good there, particularly with the development of the Afghan security forces, and I do think that is probably sooner or later the way we're going to get out of that country is by building the Afghan security forces up to a level that we can lead. I am in strong agreement, vehement agreement with some of the things that General McChrystal said in his recent review and his proposed changes. I should be clear that I left before General McChrystal arrived. My boss would have reported to his predecessor, General McKiernan, and so my experience is very much of that experience that McChrystal observed and found to be broken.
Okay. So you were there trying to help the Afghan army become a more effective force, is that right?
That's right. I was working predominantly with the Afghan army. I did have some interaction with the police and also their secret police, the National Directorate for Security. The Afghan army is about 90,000 people on paper, and it's divided into brigades. And each brigade is responsible for one or more of the country's 30 provinces. 1st Brigade of the 205th Corps is responsible for Kandahar province, or was when I was there. Mm-hmm. When I was there, it had about 1,600 effectives, all more or less light motorized infantry driving around in Ford Rangers. They had some other capabilities, but it was predominantly infantry. At the same time in Kandahar province when I was there, there were over 3,000 coalition armed forces, mostly Canadian, some American, and obviously that number has increased considerably since the first American surge early this year, which was again after.
So you're in Kandahar, which is considered crucial, right? Because that is kind of the city. Well, it's in Pashtun country, right? Which is the ethnic base of the Taliban. And
Kandahar province has got about 1 million people. About half of those are in Kandahar city proper. The province is 100% Pashtun, really. There aren't any people of any significant number from other ethnicities. And Certainly, it's seen as a heartland. It's seen as a place that is spiritually connected to the current insurgency.
Right. I mean, I've heard it described as the city that, above all, we have to not let fall to the Taliban. Is that kind of strategically? Is that a reasonable way to think of it?
Yeah, I don't know that the insurgents right now are particularly keen on taking it over. Keeping 500,000 people happy would be hard, but certainly they have a keen interest. They did when I was there, of intimidating that population into rejecting foreigners and rejecting the kind of Kabul-based centralism that the Afghan army is there, or they see the Afghan army as being there to enforce.
And by the way, is the Afghan army, which you were in contact with, were the troops there in Kandahar ethnically Pashtun?
Well, it's fair to say that the parts of the country that are not rejectionist are overrepresented in the military as a whole. Mm. Tajiks from the north are overrepresented. Hazaras from the center are as well, to a lesser extent. My direct counterpart, an Afghan major, who was their G2, their intelligence officer, he was Pashtun, as was the chief operations officer and the brigade commander. But they were all largely sort of Pashtuns from the Kabul areas of the country that are generally still supportive of the central government. So it's really not so much that Pashtuns are excluded, so much as southern and eastern Pashtuns who don't believe Kabul should be running things are excluded.
Which leads to a disproportionate representation of non-Pashtuns on balance.
Absolutely. The officer corps is a combination of people who worked with the Northern Alliance, as it was called before 2001, or Najibullah's army, the ex-Soviet army from before that. Those two factions have more or less made up. But what you won't see anyone who ever worked with Hekmatyar, the radical Pashtun leader from around Jalalabad, or anyone who's really had a long history with the Taliban. They're not working.
And I gather this is a problem because, to some extent, the conflict in Afghanistan is ethnic, I'm told. And so, or at least there is tension, there is ethnic tension that underlies some of the conflict, and the Taliban draws support from Pashtun nationalists, kind of. And so I assume it's a problem if the troops who come to counteract the influence of the Taliban in Pashtun areas are not themselves Pashtun, right?
It may be. I mean, the countervailing thing is if you're not a local, you're not subject to the existing power structures. We had some very effective Hazara police, actually, in Jari district of Kandahar. Hazaras are Shiites from the center of the country and don't have a whole lot of common with locals, but there was no doubt everyone thought they weren't corrupt. And maybe that had something to do with the fact that they were effectively far from home. The same could probably be said about some of the soldiers. The good thing, though, one of the good things about working with the Afghan army, though, is the degree that they are willing to let these kind of bygones be bygones. And I'm in a bilingual army myself, the Canadian Army. We use both English and French as operating languages, and I was consistently amazed with my Afghan colleagues, their ability to switch between the two languages of their country, Dari and Pashtun. Most of the senior officers are effortlessly bilingual. And they have a lot of respect for each other, whether they're Tajik, Pashtun, or Hazara. They see themselves really as brothers in arms.
Right, although I would think when we're talking about the foot soldiers, it would be important that they be able to communicate with the local Pashtuns, so their linguistic capacity is important too, not just the officers, right?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely important, and it gets even more complicated because there are the two languages, Dari and Pashto. Even finding local interpreters for ourselves can be a challenge because of that.
Okay. Now I would like to, if possible, draw on both what you've learned in your job per se, helping to train and guide Afghan troops, and also just your observations about the population dynamics and the sentiments of the people and where their hearts are and what are the ingredients of Taliban success and Taliban failure. And I'd just like to start with something you said earlier when I think you talked about the Taliban trying to intimidate local people into kind of not siding with your cause? That was going on in Kandahar, is that right?
There is a lot of intimidation. It's probably an overstatement to say that the Taliban rules purely by intimidation. There is a lot of local support, and it is largely a local force. Pakistanis and so on are picked up pretty quickly in that kind of environment. They just don't fit in. Are a lot of locals. Obviously, a lot of them do cross the border for various reasons. But it's very much a Pashtun insurgency. The insurgents themselves, certainly there's some religious extremism in their ranks. We saw some attacks on girls' schools while we were there. But I guess my point is that the local support is there. They do embark on all kinds of campaigns of intimidation, assassination. That's really against people who oppose them, and against them. They when someone sticks their neck out, and whether it's a mullah giving a speech in a mosque or a female police officer getting attention, they rapidly become a target for a campaign of intimidation, leading sooner or later to assassination.
And why is the support there to the extent that the support is there? I would think that's a real problem for us to the extent that there is just indigenous support for the Taliban. What is the source of the support?
Well, I think that's a really good question. There is, I think, a limited ability. There has been a limited ability up to this point to really extend what can be seen as positive effects into these people's lives.
By us, you mean?
Yeah, I think so, and by the Afghan central government too. I mean, but the insurgency itself is it's rejectionist, it's decentralist. It does not want Kabul running things, and it's strongly anti-foreigner. And this is part of the difficulty that to the degree the Afghan central government is associated with a large foreign armed presence, it can be as much of a turn-off for the local people as and that's why I think that General McChrystal's right, that we need to move to putting the lead security responsibility for areas like Kandahar province over to Afghan forces as quickly as possible.
Okay, so it sounds like the support for the Taliban lies partly in skepticism about the Afghan central government, partly in the presence of foreign troops, right? I mean, resistance to the idea of foreign troops being there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that would seem to me a real problem for us, for troops that we send over there, if they themselves are the source of if their presence, is the source of the resistance.
Well, yeah, there's no question.